Hello pals and welcome to a new video. I'm Kate and today we're going to be talking about the books that I read in the month of August. Before we get started, August was a funny old month for me. It is my busy season in work, so I was travelling quite a lot for work, and then I'm also doing a yoga new certification, so I was studying quite a lot. All that to say, I didn't have a ton of headspace for reading. And when I was choosing my books, I was really looking for kind of like page turning, quite comforting, kind of warm books. Did I succeed in that? Well, it's a little bit mixed, but I'll stop rambling and we'll just go ahead and get started. I have a cup of nettle tea today as I'm trying to be good and very much the jury's still out on this. The first book I'm going to talk about, I have really mixed feelings on, but before I get started, I wanted to say, I know a lot of people love this book, really love it. Some people whose opinion I really trust adore it also. Our kind of experiences with books are very subjective, and depending on kind of where we're at in the moment. With that disclaimer out of the way, the first book that I read in August is The Shell Seekers by Rosamunde Pilcher. I have mixed feelings about this. I read this on my Kobo, so I don't have a physical copy. On the one hand, this is a fairly big time commitment. It's over 700 pages, so quite a long read. I did stick with it. I didn't DNF this one, so there must have been something about it that kept me going. What I really wanted from this was to be able to turn my brain off a little bit and have something warm and comforting and page turning, like I said. Did I get that from this? I don't think I did. This is a family saga, which I am appreciating kind of a lot at the moment, published in 1987. It follows a woman called Penelope Keeling. She is the daughter of a kind of renowned Victorian painter. She's had a very kind of bohemian upbringing between London and Cornwall. When we meet her, she is in her 60s. She's had a health scare. And we meet her and her 3 children, and we kind of move between their kind of viewpoints. And then in the middle section of the book, we go back to Penelope's life during the Second World War in Cornwall. This comes with so many recommendations from people. And when I read that synopsis, I was like, well, that sounds absolutely perfect. Things that I really liked about this book: the Porthcaris, Cornwall, Second World War chapters, passages, I thought were done really well, but they captured the kind of mundanity of war, the rations, the boredom, the waiting really well. I also thought that it captured Penelope's sense of kind of wanting to contribute and trying to find meaning in those years well too. I do love Cornwall as a setting because it's very Daphne du Maurier. As soon as I see a book is set in Cornwall, that's like an immediate tick for me. There are a longer list of cons of this book for me though. The first one being that I found the writing a little bit cringy at times. Having said that, the Second World War passages were my favourite. It takes an awfully long time to get there. We're talking maybe like 200, 250 pages until we reach that point, if not more. Also, one of the major faults I found with this book is that the balance of the book, the pacing and the focus feels really odd. As an example, you initially, in the kind of first 200 pages, invest an awful lot of time with Penelope's children, her 3 children, Olivia, Nancy and Noel. However, at the end, especially for 2 of them, it's wrapped up so quickly that you don't get any payoff for that investment, so the balance feels odd. Now we'll come to the big problem for me with this book, and that is that the characters that you're meant to root for, that you're meant to like, I really didn't warm to at all. And the first one being Penelope, her daughter Olivia, a couple of other examples too. I would say that all round actually the characters fall quite flat, but without having somebody to root for and without the writing being, especially good, and there isn't a lot of plot in this, without having that tether to the book, it just left me feeling really cold. As an example, Penelope's daughter Olivia, who is her favourite, she is the editor of like a women's magazine. She is very ambitious and independent. I think you're meant to find her inspiring. I didn't. I found her really cold, judgmental, a little bit mean-spirited. The main problem is that I didn't warm to Penelope. She's meant to be this bohemian, free-spirited character. And she's meant to be like very like welcoming, very warm. I actually found her really judgmental too, really aloof. She plays favourites with her kids. Just didn't take to her at all. Also, a major part of the plot didn't make sense to me. Penelope is meant to be this free-spirited woman. She's been brought up in a really kind of bohemian household by artists. She's travelled a lot, but a major part of the plot hinges on the fact that she stays in a loveless marriage because that's what's expected of her, even though she's given huge amounts of free rein by all of her friends and by her family. Actually, her decisions seem utterly conventional to me, and she's only really free-spirited in a really superficial sense. Like, she'll wear like jumble shop clothes, but actually when it comes down to it, she's a very like traditional woman. So that side of the plot I just didn't buy into. And what I will say is that I found this really superficially warm, if that makes sense. There's lots of lighting fires in cold rooms and baking bread and lunches in like countryside cottages, but everything else I found I didn't connect with, and it left me feeling quite detached. My overall feeling from this was that I actually could have read a Woodhouse, Jeeves and Worcester, a Barbara Pym, even some Daphne du Maurier, and got what I was looking for like a third of the pages. The jury's out on whether I would read another Rosamunde Pilcher. I think she does have a book set in the 30s, which probably, judging from the sections of this book that I did enjoy, would be more for me. But this wasn't a great reading experience, and there's so many good books out there. So if you love this, that's great. What I will say is I think if I had read this as a teenager, I probably would have loved it, and now I would be very sentimentally attached to it. I think coming at it fresh in like your 30s, probably not a great idea. If you like this one, fab. Like I said, we all have such different opinions on books. Second book is The Siege by Helen Dunmore. This is a historical novel set during the siege of Leningrad during the Second World War. Well, no, we know it as St. Petersburg. During the Second World War, the German army kind of enact a military blockade around Leningrad, which essentially becomes an island for years. The Siege is an account of that first winter through the eyes of one family, and specifically the daughter of that family, Anna. She is living in a flat in St. Petersburg with her father, her little brother and some family friends. And this is a book about, I guess, about like survival, like determination, family, compassion at points as well. Helen Dunmore is one of my favourite historical novelists. She sadly passed away a few years ago. We'll talk more about some of her other books that I really like a little bit later on. She actually won the inaugural Women's Prize. It was called the Orange Prize back in the 90s for one of her novels called A Spell in Winter, which I haven't read yet, but I do have upstairs on my TBR. I really liked this book. I've liked all of her previous works that I've read. The historical detail in this is so well done. The level of research, again, fantastic. And Dunmore, a lot like Hilary Mantel, you can tell how much research goes into her novels, and yet it's worn really lightly throughout. Just little tiny details if you're familiar with kind of the history of the Eastern Front during the Second World War. Things like the German army having to kind of change their rolling stock of trains to fit the right train lines. Just little details that are like really accurate and just add so much to the novel. One of the things that I also really love about Helen Dunmore is just that she is a terrific writer. On like a line by line basis, her writing is really poetic, but in all of her novels, she really cultivates this amazing sense of like atmosphere. In this, unfortunately, it's like a pervading sense of like desperation and death. This is not kind of a light-hearted novel, as you can probably guess from the subject matter. There's these amazing early passages in the novel. The German army start to advance on St. Petersburg, and there is like this sense of like complete desperation as people in St. Petersburg are conscripted into kind of building defences around the city. Those early passages are so brilliantly done. There's not a lot of plot in this. This is basically just about one family surviving. The only downside to this for me is that there is a love story in this, which I thought was a little bit unnecessary and actually found quite like jarring and quite rushed. As a comparison, there is also a love story set during the Second World War passages of the Shell Seekers, which I actually thought was done a lot better. This one, it just felt very out of place for me. So that was the one downside of the novel. By Helen Dunmore, I have also read Birdcage Walk, which is a novel set in the 18th century in Bristol, just after the French Revolution. I really recommend that. I loved it when I read it. And also Exposure, which is her Cold War kind of spy thriller novel. I've also read some of her poetry collections. All round, she's an author that I really trust, and I am trying to kind of work through some of her backlists, which I have on my TBR. I really recommend this, especially if you're into your Second World War history or kind of novels set in Russia. A really excellent book. Next up, I took a little foray into cozy crime and I read Devil's Delight by M.C.Beaton. This is 30-something in the Agatha Raisin series. I've mainly carried on with these because I love listening to Penelope Keith narrate the audiobooks. Are these the kind of best plotted, best written mysteries? No. I'm so far into the series now that I find them quite comforting. They keep my attention. I love the setting of the Cotswolds and I know all of the characters. And actually, I always think of these as like the equivalent of like an electric blanket or like a hot water bottle. It's just something to kind of look forward to. Really listen to these for the sheer joy of the thing, which is something that I do really try to embrace. Right, next up is a poetry collection, and that is Remains of Elmet by Ted Hughes. This was on my summer reading list, so I'm really happy that I got to it. This was published in the 70s, and I think it's called Remains of Elmet or the Pennine Sequence. It is essentially poems about West Yorkshire, if you're familiar with that area, the kind of Calder Valley into Bronte country part of Yorkshire. I love that part of the country, and so I've been meaning to get to this for quite a while. I will say that this fell a little bit flat for me. It is still written by Ted Hughes though, so compared to everyone else, it is still exceptional. There's an awful lot of Yorkshire moors in this, mill towns, curlews. I do prefer Ted Hughes on the personal side. Think more birthday letters than this one. And I also think it's really bizarre that the Yorkshire of the Brontes of the 19th century becomes this Yorkshire of Ted Hughes in the 20th century, there or thereabouts. For the vast majority of this, I read a poem in the mornings, which I loved doing and which I do want to carry on doing. So that is the poetry collection of the month. Right, next up is Thomas Hardy's first novel, Desperate Remedies. This was a strange one for me because I was reading Thomas Hardy, but not as I know and love him. I read this because it is his first novel and I do want to complete all of his works. And I do trust Thomas Hardy. He always delivers. Usually that is kind of like misery and like devastation. However, this one is odd. After I finished this, I went back and watched a few videos because this was just like a very strange reading experience. This is very dramatic. It's very like sensationalist. There's an awful lot going on in this. It's like he threw the kitchen sink at the novel, and that seems to be the general consensus in the kind of reviews on YouTube that I've watched. Plot-wise, I don't want to give too much away because this is really a novel that hinges on the kind of twists and turns, although you can kind of see them coming. And actually, in general, for Thomas Hardy novels, stay away from plot spoilers because they will ruin them for you. What I will say as well is that I read this on my Kobo and I bought the Oxford World Classics edition, and they do ruin a part of the plot for you. So yeah, skip the introduction if you're reading classics always. This follows a young woman called Cytherea Grey. After the death of her father, she takes a position as a lady's maid, and this is kind of a mystery, romance, sensation novel, essentially. Like I said, this is early Hardy, but it is still Thomas Hardy, and the writing is still really beautiful in passages, especially when he focuses on like the nature and the landscape. It's not a Wessex novel, so you're kind of not in that world. I'm glad that I read this, and it was interesting to see how his earlier works develops into some of my favourite novels. What I will say is that although I enjoyed it, I did find myself having to force myself into reading it. I'm guessing an awful lot of you watching this will have kind of read some Thomas Hardy. If you've never read any, I always recommend starting with Far From the Madding Crowd. And the last book I did speak about in my autumn reading recommendations, and so I won't rehash it here, but it is A Study in Scarlett by Arthur Conan Doyle. This is the first of the Sherlock Holmes novels. I listened to the audiobook of this, the Stephen Fry one, which is what I recommended in that video. I absolutely love Stephen Fry narrating it. The only thing that I will say is that I'm so familiar with Stephen Fry's reading the Harry Potter novels on audiobook that occasionally I'll be like, oh, you're doing that character in your like Uncle Vernon voice, which I always find like quite funny. I had a great time with this. This is like a solid mystery. It has a great sense of like adventure and fun. I don't think it's the best Sherlock Holmes. I think my favourite is probably Hound of the Baskervilles, and some of the short stories, but I actually really enjoyed listening to it. I had a great time. Few other things to mention before I end the video. I'm currently listening to Parade's End by Ford Madox Ford, which was my summer novel that I wanted to get to. I'm almost done with that one. I'm having the absolute most incredible time, and I think potentially this is my favourite novel ever. And I'm also working my way slowly through my Frances Wilson biography of Dorothy Wordsworth, which I'd hoped to have finished, but I just haven't had time. That is it for today. If you've read any of these or have any recommendations, do leave them in the comments down below. I do love hearing from everyone, and I will see you all soon in the next video. Bye!